I'm telling
Just
you.
reading through these questions.
Yeah, it's just
Alone.
crazy. It just is so crazy to me. And I say this and I said it on the discussion board post or whatever, but like the British came here to escape kind of tyranny and oppression and whatever. And then they get here and they just become awful people.
Right?
Yeah.
It just is amazing to me.
Well, it goes back to that whole thing of history. What do we learn from history is that we don't learn from history.
Yeah, history repeats itself over and over again.
It's ironic.
Yeah.
They were doing the same thing, but sometimes, and I wonder if that's because it's ingrained. It's just like us in parenting. We're 50% more likely to repeat what our parents did to us just because that's what we grew up around. So maybe that's because that's what they are around and they didn't realize that that's what they were doing, but they also wanted, maybe because they were oppressed so bad over there that they came and they're like, we're not going to let anybody in our way. We're doing our thing now. I mean, either way, it's still terrible. It's like when you look at all the things that they did, it's like, really?
Yeah, it was awful. It was awful, awful, awful. So
Crazy.
Let's get to the mascots, I guess.
This one actually cracked me up because this is like an ongoing topic and debate. I mean, I like sports and everything, and this one drives me crazy. And I don't support the name change, so I will put my standpoint right there just because of that. My mom grew up in Cleveland, and my brother's a big Indians fan, and that drives him bonkers that they're trying to change the whole Chief Wahoo label. And so I was like, dude, I've already had this discussion. This was kind of perfect. I'm like, well, that is actually suiting because it does open up debate. But it was like, okay, at least this one I can have some fun with is to see, kind of how it goes. But it does raise interesting points. I did do some study on this last night on both sides, so I'm not just, hey, gonna be a stick in the mud. But I find it interesting. It's a big challenge.
Well, and interesting enough, I worked for Dan Snyder for several years, who's the owner of the Washington Redskins.
Okay.
And it did not, him coming out and being so like, I'm not doing it, but I was like, yep, there's Dan. Nobody's telling him what to do. Even if he feels like even if he sits at home and says, oh, we should change it, he's going, nope, because then they're going to think that they made me change my mind. That's just his lovely personality.
That's what it seemed like. He's being more stubborn about it because they keep asking, and now it's like when you're forced to do something, of course you're gonna kick against it. If it was more, hey, let's discuss, but it's like, nope, I'm not debating anymore.
Yep. Oh yeah. Oh no. That is him to a T.
So all right, let's go for it. I'll let you start this off. Ask us our questions.
Okay, so recently the Washington Redskins, a football team in Washington, D.C., have come under criticism for their use of Redskins as the team's name and mascot. Several Native American tribes and groups have asked the team to change their name, pointing out that this is a derogatory term. Do you think that the name Redskins displays racism?
Come on, Mikkel, tell us. What do you think?
Oh, I'm not.
You know what? I don't like that. Never bothered me. That term, it just didn't. Maybe because I grew up in the Northeast and I'm a Cowboy fan, so there was always always an NFC, like they're all part of the NFC East group. So I've just my whole life that's who they've been, right? The Redskins. So to me, it's just I don't find it offensive, but I'm also not Native American.
Yeah. I feel like I have a pretty like objective standpoint because I don't follow sports. Frankly, I don't care, but I am also like not Native American. I don't know. It's hard because I like obviously they have a problem with it, but I don't feel like they're defiling the name. They're not like a group that's like trying to annihilate them Native Americans. It's literally just a football team. Like they're not doing anything to demean the name, I guess I'm trying to say. So I don't know. I know the name itself is probably the issue, but I feel like there's not really, I don't know. It's hard because they feel like there is an issue. I don't know. I'm still kind of indifferent towards it.
So the take that I have, and that's why I said I don't take this whole thing that lightly. I've looked into it and I've talked about it quite a bit. But at the same time, that was the first thing I did. It's like I tried to put myself in their spot. Okay, if I was Native American, would it be because of the name? And I actually looked up Wikipedia last night, looking at the Redskins. And originally, the name, actually, that's what they referred. It was actually a positive, and it wasn't anything derogatory. But over time, that name became a pejorative, and it changed the meaning. And now it was like around the 1900s is when it kind of shifted, that people started changing, because words over time change and the meaning adjusts. And so I think they've changed that. And like you said, it's several, but there's so many. It seems like on some of the reviews, I've read a bunch of sports articles because they release them all the time. But some of them end up saying, it's only this select group, or now it's this group, and it's only a small percentage, which it's like I kind of look at the broad scheme of all the political issues right now with these minor groups. It's the minority of people that are trying to make this big stink that it's like throughout, it's really not a big issue, but they're making it one. So they're trying to get everybody else to harp on that, oh, it's offensive and it's this. And, they've talked to some groups that, hey, I don't mind it at all. I don't find anything offensive about it. And like the Indians and the Aitawi, because they're very similar and they're doing the same thing. But even the tribe that they feel great. They're recognizing us. It's not like the team is doing anything to discriminate or put them down. It is, I guess, I don't know if they're true is to honor them, but at least it's a name. I mean, look at any other sports name. That's how I look at it. It's a name. I mean, are we going to complain about the Panthers? I mean, is the Panther going to start complaining that people are using his name the wrong way and representing him? But yes, I understand we've tied this stereotype, and you look at the back history. Okay, I can understand that, well, it really doesn't have a good connotation from the past, but is what's being effective? Is that really the reason behind it, or is it just a small group like we're seeing in today's wave? Whoever cries the loudest, they're just willing to change, and it's the politically correct versus, but they're taking it out of context.
It's also, I feel like, I mean, after what you said, like with the research and everything, it makes me think that maybe they're also just doing it for attention. Like they have that card to play, like, oh, well, you guys came and took our land, and now you're taking our name. Like that sort of. It almost sounds like they're just doing it for attention, especially if it is a little bit of is a minority of the minority. It just sounds like they're just trying to be dramatic about it.
Exactly. It's more like, hey, let's bring this up and make an issue versus, hey, let's actually have a discussion, because they were even saying, which I had learned, that they've been putting these protest Indians at different events to just make a bigger scene. And it's like, yeah, but are those the ones that are really having an issue? Like, it's that new fad wave, so they're just getting whoever, and it's not really the ones that are, hey, these are the reasons why, versus, oh, well, we'll just throw whatever study, this, that, the other thing. And they did a bunch of different polls, and they've tried to disprove the polls, but it's like, it was almost on one of them, it was like 90% were like, it doesn't offend me at all. And they were asking Native Americans. So it's like, and maybe it's the ties, and maybe they're associating, so they're just choosing, well, yeah, it bugs me, but it's so hard to have an open discussion. Like, tell me what your true issue is. Are you really having an issue, or is it just, oh, it's appalling, and then they pull up all this data that, I don't know as much about the Redskins, but that's why I kind of refer back to the Indians. But, the mascot, Chief Wahoo, it was a caricature made off of that little Samba. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. What the heck? But I know my mom grew up with it. It was around it was like the 50s and 60s, and it was this little black boy. He'd run around, and he ended up making milk. And so the guy that had drawn it kind of used a little bit of his face. So then they're like, oh, now it's representing a little black boy and an Indian. How disparaging. And it's like, but that was like the art of the time, and that's what he kind of based it off, and just trying to make it cartoonish where it wasn't offensive. It was just honoring. It was just, that's just what his art was. Like, there's plenty of other art that I find offensive. Come on now. And so I think in that sense, it's like, well, what exactly is the problem with it? Where I think that big challenge came was the early 1900s when they changed the meaning. That originally, just like the homosexuals, you could always say gay and this other stuff, and it didn't mean that. Nowadays, it's, you have to be very careful saying it, and you have to use it in the right context. But the name changed.
Yeah.
But it used to not mean that.
And I don't know, maybe this is like a stupid thought I had, but usually when people pick mascots, like, do they want them to be like intimidating, like, ooh, that's a strong team, like the Panthers or like something like that? So maybe they were like, ooh, the Redskins, like, that's intimidating. People are gonna be like, oh yeah, they're gonna beat me. Like, it's almost like a compliment of like their strength if they do pick it off of that. I don't know.
Well, and I said too, like, if you know, if it was Savages, you know what I mean? If it was the Washington Savages, I think that's different, because they did use that as derogatory, where they you know, Redskin wasn't a derogatory name when it was first started using it, you know. Now, granted, the football team came many, many, many years after, you know, this happened, but you know, I get a little frustrated with kind of all the political correctness. I certainly think that we need to be respectful, and I need, you know, I get that. But on the other hand, most of the time, people who are, you know, fists in the air and complaining, they're not even part of that group. So I think if it's, you know, like this said, there were Native American tribes that were trying to get them to change it. I think that's very different than, you know, other people that step in and say, well, I'm offended because you used this word, when that doesn't apply to them at all.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you can't be offended or you can't be sensitive to somebody else. But sometimes I think it is just you know, I'm going to get on my soapbox and make some noise because I can.
Yeah.
And do you really care? I don't know.
Exactly.
That's just my.
And that's what I agree with too, that it's hard with this whole political correctness that it's changed, that everybody's so sensitive about every little thing. But at the same time, it's like, well, then show me how many groups out of, you know, I mean, our book was showing there's like 500 tribes or something still, or at one point there were, and they've whittled them down. Well, show out of all those little divisions, how many are actually opposing it versus the one or two that actually want it, and maybe have that debate. And I think it came out to like, it's only like 1.2 million people that really have an issue of like the Indians. So it's like, okay, so you're still like 1% of your nationality or race or whatever that has an issue, but the rest of them aren't. So that's where I find it hard to be like, well, if it's a name, you know, the other one that you could bring in, and I bring all these different, see, I told you, I've looked at this even with the Red Sox, Yawkey Way. They're trying to rename that, and that might be for you, Joan, because you're up in that area. But they in the 60s.
But I am not a Red Sox fan. Just that aside. Yankees all the way. Yankees all the way.
I'm just saying in that the area, but they've made a big stink about it lately because he was the last owner to allow a black player on his team. They're like, he was so racist. But the Yawkey Foundation has done so much for the community, for the people, and really portrayed. And that's where it's like, but now it's basically you're trying to just rip history out of its place, just like the whole Confederacy. Oh, we got to rip it all down because all. But you're also trying to just get rid of history, not saying it's good or bad, just at the same time, we just want all this fair weather stuff and everybody just be happy. And it's like, but you're missing the point. That's where we can discuss and say, look, that's how it used to be, but we've changed. You want to just cover him up and act like that never happened, but that's what it was at the time. I mean, if you want to say, hey, go Dodgers, the Dodgers were the one. I'm not a Dodgers fan. I'm an Angels fan. But they're the ones that, you know, with Jackie Robinson allowed the barrier to break. And so I think you have to look at the different time frames of what they're challenging and the reasoning, whether it was right or wrong, and it was a challenge. But, you know, the one thing, I mean, watching the Jackie Robinson movie, he's like, we have to do this. This is the right thing to do. somebody's got to make a change. And so I think maybe theirs was more financial gain, but at the same time, it's like, so what are we trying to protect here? Is it really that abusive or not? I mean,
right. Well, then if you go to question 2, right, what would your response be, you know, if the mascot was Chink or Polak? And to me, those are just much more offensive words.
exactly.
And they were, you know, they've always been used as, you know, as hurtful and attacking the nationality. Where again, Redskin wasn't at the beginning, wasn't, you know, that wasn't the terminology. And who, I mean, I don't know who took the term Redskin and turned it from being a word of showing power and pride in who they were as a people to it now being a derogatory term. I don't know. You know, with Chink or Polak, I hate even saying those words, you know, has always been.
Yeah, I agree.
Derogatory, in my opinion.
Yeah, I kind of looked at it. It didn't seem like anybody specifically. It just started to change in the way that they used the term. It was like, for some reason, it just started to change, and there wasn't really a justification. Everyone just started associating it that way and made it bad. And I guess that's how you jump with that.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree.
More comments on the second part there, the Chink or Polak question.
Me?
I mean, any but I mean, any of them. I mean, you could go through a whole bunch. It's like I said, my mom grew up in Cleveland, and my grandparents were very colorful at times. And my mom sheltered us. She would not allow us to hear like any of it, or tried to just shelter. And finally, it was like right after my mission the one time, and one of my buddies knew all the different terms, and we were saying it the one time, and she looked at me like with this puzzled look, but also like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I'm like, huh? And she's like, you think I was sheltered, but you know, because before she joined the church, she goes, my family was slightly on the racist, and like right across the street from us were 2 black families, wonderful people, great. And she's like, when my grandpa came and visited the one time, it was blah, 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 blah. And then, and my mom's like, Dad, like, but that's just how the environment, not saying it was right, not condoning, but it was just the fact of that's how they referred to these people. And so, I mean, like I said, you know, if you wanted to talk about the blacks, you could use the N word that everybody uses, or you could, you know, one of their terms, it is negative, but you could call them jungle bunnies or the moon crickets. If you had a team like that, I would be like, hello, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Now, some people are a little naive. My mom shares the story that they did girls camp and they had these shorts, and it was a safari thing. And so my mom was like, yeah, the jungle bunnies. And the one lady went with it, and she was totally naive. She's like, yeah, we're going to be the jungle bunnies. And one of the other ladies was like, looked at my mom like, I can't believe you said that. And she's now trying to say, like, no, you cannot do that. Like, it's not a good thing. And so some people don't realize in being naive, but at the same time, I think that would be a very negative response that, okay, that's directly used in the negative. That's what it's being used as a term. And so I think any of those, it's blatant. Like, I just think the Redskin, it's kind of an in-between that it wasn't really ever ingrained growing up like, hey, this is wrong. And maybe that's because it was mostly around a white culture, but you just never really saw that. I mean, the news will talk about the words that are used for other races that they don't like, you know, but it's, you know, for the Mexicans, they talk about the wetback. Would you want a team name? That's pretty bad. Like that's
I know. Yeah.
You know, and so that's horrible to be like, okay, that, and I think that's the connotation that's attached to that name. And so I guess maybe that's why this isn't really seen that way, but you know, you go and tell the 10 of them.
But then there could be some people that find that just as offensive as, you know, Polak.
True.
So I don't know. I think it all depends on.
Yeah. I feel like they've always been used to attack. I think that was you that said that, Joan. They've always been used in a demeaning tone towards the
Mhm.
specific nationalities. So, therefore, I think it makes it racist to almost make fun of them like that. So,
Exactly.
yep.
Okay. So 3 Native American high schools in Washington, Arizona, and Oklahoma use the name Redskins for their sports team. Is it acceptable for Native American teams to use this as the mascot?
Yeah.
So I have a couple thoughts on this. I'm saying, I don't think that it matters themselves that they're Native Americans. It gives them the right to use it, just like I don't think it's right for blacks to be able to use the N-word, right? Like nobody should use that word. For this though, on the other hand, are they using it to reflect who they really are?
Yeah.
If they're Native Americans, schools, are they using it to say, hey, this is what we are? And again, are they wearing it proudly? Who knows?
I just feel like if they get to pick, then they can't throw a fit when we do it. I don't know. That's my.
Well,
Exactly.
I agree with you on that, Mikkel. You know what I mean? If a word is offensive, then it's offensive. It doesn't matter if it's a Native American using it against themselves. If it's not, it's like, and I was just I don't even remember what I was watching, but somebody was saying, like for women, you know what I mean? Like, women will call each other the B word all the time. Just they do in
to be funny,
just in love and whatever. But if a man calls a woman that, then it's like, oh my gosh, look what you've done. So, the same thing with the N-word. I don't think anybody should be using it. I don't think it's acceptable for anybody to use it because it was always used as a derogatory, put down word to put somebody in their place. So that's just me. It's kind of if it's outlawed, it should be outlawed for everybody, not just for people who are not of that race or nationality.
Absolutely. And that's the point, and that's exactly where my reference, as soon as I was reading that, I'm like, the N-word with them came straight up, that it's like, and that's the same thing, because they'll tell you, I've had something that's like, it's okay for us to use it with each other. They use it in their music and everything else, but as soon as a white person says it, no. But it's like, but what are you teaching us? Your music shares it all the time, so people are repeating your music that has the words that you said. You want them to follow you, but now you can't use it because it's out of context. And then they jump at you for political correct. No, that's our word. That's how we refer to each other as brothers. Like, it's cool. I mean, still, it cracks me up. About a year ago, I was working in downtown LA. We were putting up one of our signs for my company. And me and my brother were working on the sign. And, I had somewhat of a tan and I was a little bit darker. And I'm standing on the side of the road. And this guy is trying to tell his homeboy, like, how to come pick him up. And mind you, he's black. And he's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. He goes, yeah, just right over here where these two ends are working. And he's using that for a white guy. I'm like, wait a second. Like, as far as I checked, I'm pretty darn white. I mean, yes, I tan fairly well and I can get fairly dark in the summer. But I'm like, all right. I mean, but this was the black guy using that N-word towards me. And I'm like, okay, and that's and it wasn't like it was derogatory. It was just the way he was referring it, that where these two guys are working.
Right on Smith Street, yeah.
And it's like, okay, so it's okay for you to use it, but if I were to say the thing, it's whoa. And so that's where I think, you know what, if these Native American schools want to, hey, they're reflecting, I guess, what their nationality is, or hey, well, that's our school, okay? Why shouldn't they? So if that's a problem, maybe that's where the rest of those Indians should attack them first, that their whole group throughout. But obviously, they don't see it as an issue. So I would think it's acceptable if they're thinking it's not derogatory and it's like, hey, that's a cool name, we like it. Then it should be fair for everybody throughout. But if they're allowed to use it and they're telling us we can't, then that's where I would think there's a double standard and you shouldn't be doing that, because it should be throughout. You're not sending a mixed message.
Yeah. Yep.
Good point. All righty. So in 2005, the NCAA banned any college with a hostile or abusive mascot, nickname, or imagery from hosting any sort of championship competition. They made a special exception for any team with the formal tribe name, like the University of Utah Utes or the Florida State Seminoles. Why do you think the NCAA would grant this exception? I don't really have an answer for this one.
I don't either.
If I think about it, I guess it's just it seems more when you're using the tribe name as opposed to a reference to how they look.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly what I felt. The reason I think for that is because the Utes. It's like it is the Utes. It's the Utah Utes. That's the tribe. It's not a specific racial epitaph or slang or pejorative. That's the name of the tribe. And just like the Seminoles, I mean, our book even talked about it with the casinos, that the Seminoles have made like they've made the most money with their Seminole tribe. So I think that refers to the tribe. So it's not necessarily saying it's a hostile or abusive mascot, nickname, or imagery. But it's just representing them. It represents the whole tribe versus, it's just like the Sioux Indian or the Cherokee. That's what it is. They're referring to the Cherokee, not, okay, well, let's throw, the Pollock or other term at them that I guess it defines it a little bit. So it's like, well, how can you tell them that they're using specifically that tribe? And obviously the Seminoles are from Florida State. So I think that's fair enough to allow Florida State to use that. And I'm sure they've worked with the Indian group saying, hey, I don't know the whole history of the Seminoles, but with Florida State and the whole thing, but maybe they talked with them and it's in a positive. So they've proven to the NCAA that, hey, it's not hostile, it's not abusive, and it's representing the people. I know they have
area, right? Like the Utes were actually settled in Utah, didn't they? And then the Seminoles actually settled in Florida. So
exactly. So they're in their region, and so you're representing that area. And I mean, typically that's kind of what they've used names to determine in certain areas. I mean, I know where I grew up.
Texas has the Cowboys.
There's a town in Idaho called Blackfoot. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Just frustrating. That's all.
But I think it's who developed the area and who was there at the time and what tribe and what group. And, and so I think that's why that it's, is it wrong? I mean, you think of a lot of California, like the high school I went to, we were the Aztecs. And it's like, I thought that was the stupidest name because it really didn't mean a whole lot. But it's like the area because it's still closer to Mexico and you got all the Incas and a lot of them came up. So it makes sense, kind of the region. And so if you look at different ones, that's kind of like the name that they use. But it's almost like, okay, if you're going to make that argument, it's like, well, if it's at least from the region and that's the history. I mean, you look at Virginia, it's the Cavaliers, okay? Well, that's kind of what you think of was in that area at the time. And so it makes sense. They're tributing to what kind of some of the heritage. I mean, you get the Philadelphia 76ers. 76ers, why is it that? Okay, so we got the history. So I think it's just these different names. I mean, I don't know what a Washington National is, but hey, I guess it's for patriotism, but
it's a national. It's a national. It's the nation's capital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got the Yankees. I mean, what were the Yankees? I mean, what were the New Yorkers called? They were called Yankees.
Yes,
well, we're all Yankees. Go to British. Hey, it's the Yanks. Hey, it's the Yankees. So is that because they were predominantly?
The North were the Yankees. When you had the North and the South, the northern people were the Yankees.
So is that wrong then too? Because the Yankees is referring to a white group, and look at what the white group did. I mean, isn't that? Yeah. I mean, if you want to make the argument, that's how I look at it. It's like if you're going to make an argument, then what? We can't go with the black and the white and the red and the yellow team. You're going to have to, or if you do A, B, and C, someone's going to get offended with the color. So are we just going to have no-name teams? I mean, team 1, team 2? I mean,
right. Let's go blue. Let's go red.
It's like, where does it stop that they want to justify this?
Yeah. Aaron, I have a question for you because you do follow sports. Like you have done, it sounds like you have done research on this. So I've personally, like, I've heard of people complaining about the Redskins, and I don't follow sports, but I've never heard somebody complaining of the Utah Utes or the Florida Seminoles. Have you? Like, are there people that are like, oh, that's offensive? Like, I don't feel like anybody's really made like a big deal about it. I think the actual, like, the Utes themselves don't care. Like the group themselves, if they haven't said anything, they probably don't mind as well.
No, I think like that's why I said it's hard and frustrating because it's not like a clear reason. That I think it's just the fact. I don't even think. I mean, even I know for years ago it was like the Braves, and they had their whole chant, and they wanted them to get rid of that. Through the '90s, the Indians and the Braves went to the playoffs, and you'd always hear it. And they ended up starting to ban that you can't do the tomahawk chop. It's like, well, but they're not doing it offensively. It's a war cry and something to get behind. But I think it's a small group that's making that an issue. And so I think it's necessarily the name, because what are Braves? They're just representing Indians. So they're using that as a discriminating. And I think like with the Indians, there's nothing wrong with the Indians name because it's saying Indians.
Yeah.
But they're really harping on the caricature of the guy's face and everything else and trying to say, oh, it really doesn't. But my brother's looked into it a lot more because he loves the team. But the tribe in the area, they're grateful. They're getting recognition, and they feel it's an honor to have their name with that. So it's like, but they're the ones that don't have a problem, and that's who they really named the group after. So let's go talk to them versus 5 other tribes, because if you've got an American, you've got a Mexican, and you've got Chinese, and you want to talk about different policies, there's going to be disagreements. They're going to think one thing, and I'm going to think one thing. So obviously we'll never agree on the point, and I think that's the same thing. So you got still the different Indians throughout, but they all view it differently. I mean, let's go back to history. The Indians have always fought with each other about something or another. I mean, go back to the Lamanites. They were always mad, So it doesn't matter what, even if you're right, you're still wrong.
Yeah. I think you made a key point of the actual people that it's named after, where it was pride and they've gotten recognition. I think that's what matters. I don't think it matters who else is pissed off. I think as long as you're correct with the actual group you named it, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. So I think that's an important part.
Just typing something up. So the American Psychological Association put out a 2005 statement that says the continued use of American Indian mascots, symbols, images, and personalities establishes an unwelcome and oftentimes hostile learning environment for American Indian students that affirms negative images, stereotypes that are promoted in the mainstream society. Really, American Psychology Association, really? What are some stereotypes you associate with Native Americans? And you know what? I don't really, and it's truly, truly sad to say, especially after, the learnings this week, how little I knew about the history. And I don't really think about it much. I don't. I knew, of course, because the Native Americans were here first, and obviously, the whites that came over became the dominant society. So, it's not like I was naive and didn't understand that. I certainly didn't understand to the extent of the mistreatment. But I don't really, it's not something I really thought about. It's really not. I've thought about, certainly with the blacks and slavery and all of that, certainly much more. My whole life I've known about it, right? And and was appalled by it. But I never really thought about the Native Americans.
The only thing I can think of is that they're in casinos. That was like the first thing that popped into my head.
Well, yeah.
That was like it. Like I associate Native American with casinos. That's all. Maybe because in Idaho, the only casino that I know of is ran by a Native American tribe, but that's it.
True. And I mean, and I think, I mean, even this statement, it's funny because if you actually look at if you go on Wikipedia and search like Redskins and stuff and the namesake, the American Psychological Association actually put this out to kind of refute a poll. I think it was actually in 2004, just before that, of how many people supported it. So it's kind of, I think this is a biased statement just to prove, hey, this is the reason why. They're just trying to add fuel to the fire versus, well, we did our studies. And I mean, if you look at statistics, it's all a joke anyways, and it really doesn't tell us accurate information. It gets us close, but I just feel if you look at all context, it's kind of like, well, I wouldn't say per se, but I think they specifically responded to the Redskins name. It wasn't just throughout. They're just now trying to justify through everybody. But I don't know how it's an unwelcome, oftentimes hostile, because is every single situation when they're there, do those Indians feel it's hostile when they bring up those names and they support it and they're fans and they're okay? I mean, is that actually impeding their learning, or is it just they're just making that up, just like other things in society today that they're saying you cannot change it? Once a person's gender is defined, it's not changeable in their ways. It's like, but what if they want to? I mean, we're faced with it in California like crazy right now that they're trying to change the definition and even make it illegal that people cannot go and get psychological help, even if they're asking to not have those tendencies. That the law, they're trying to say, no, once they are, that's what they are. You cannot change it. You can't talk about it. You can't produce material. And it's like, wait a second, but if somebody on their own free will and choice is wanting to get the help from them, you're telling me that they're not allowed. You're now discriminating. You're holding it against them.
So what is this? They're not allowed to do what?
So, for example, those that have homosexual tendencies, they're trying to make it that currently, there's practices with like psychologists in medicine, even like churches that, they have propaganda or paperwork or stuff that preaches against homosexuality. And there's actually an initiative that they're trying to pass right now. And they said it could stretch to the Bible, that they could outlaw the Bible in California because it teaches homosexuality is wrong. And so if you have anything that teaches against it, it's wrong. You cannot do that. You can't have that. Just like you can't go to a church and if they say the support group says, hey, homosexuality is wrong, they're against that. And so you would actually be against the law and get fined and everything else. So they're trying to change it so that way people that are seeking help, if they have those tendencies but they don't want to and they want to work through the psychological part of it, they're saying they can't do that anymore. They're trying to make it illegal. So basically it's okay and homosexuality is right and we've been set up and predestined to do that. And it's like, but wait a second, but if the person wants to choose, and so that's where I struggle with some of these but that's what the group's whole game plan is. It has nothing to do with there's a serious issue. It's just a small group of people are crying and raising a stink. But I think, so when you associate those things, how does that translate into where it's truly offensive? I mean, if that's the way I think, be tolerant.
Yeah.
That is a nutty state, Aaron.
Yep. I think they're just going to fall off into the middle of the Pacific Ocean and I'll just jump ship at that time. They really
need to start putting their energies into things to keep their economy running as opposed to getting involved in all this other nonsense. That is insane.
Well, it all goes back. I mean, I don't want to get off topic here, but it's all the other initiatives that they did. I mean, back in 2000, they voted on gay marriage and everybody said like 60% said no. They voted again in 2008 and the majority still said no. And then the politicians on their own changed it and overturned it and said it's legal. Yeah. It's like, and they're trying to change everything now. And it's still that same initiative that, you change everything. And so I think, some of these stereotypes that if you look at the Indians, I mean, I guess what stereotypes would you associate? Okay, I guess to a degree, savages that don't understand. You know, the Indians, they went and scalped people. Scalping was their thing. I mean, yes, other people scalped, but that was like the main thing that you think of. And bows and arrows and, you know, riding on horses, you know, they didn't have much. They lived off the land. But also, I think some of those was like the buffalo. They respected the land. They didn't just go kill everything. They used an animal to the complete fullest potential. They basically, it would have been like the small little remnants left over that you can't use for anything, but they used like every single part for something. And so I think that would be one that it's like, well, so those would be the stereotypes that they were very mindful. They're very spiritual. I mean, I did scouts, Boy Scouts growing up, and one of the groups, it was actually Order of the Arrow, and that kind of focuses more on Indian ritual stuff, like not rituals, but the Indian way of thinking and the spirituality. And so there was some experience with getting in touch with that. It was more Indian based stuff. And, you know, learning that, you know, there was one activity where we had to spend the night all by ourselves out in the middle of nowhere and have like a fire the whole night. You had to stay awake, and it just helps you get in touch with, you know, like that spiritual sense and stuff. And so there were unique and neat things that I learned through that. So it's like, but they usually had some kind of connection with their ancestors, their history, and it was very important to them. They have their sacred burial grounds. They have things that are important. So I guess if you use that, I mean, that would support it. I mean, that would be nice. I mean, I guess if you've got a mascot that's scalping people, then yeah, you're obviously going to keep supporting that negative stereotype. That's what they do. That's how they are. Or, oh, they're the savages. I mean, let's have a name that's called the Savages. Let's see how everybody feels about that team name. You know, that's going to keep that negative stereotype going, that, hey, the Indians are just savages. You know, what about my brother served in Montana? He served on a couple of reservations, and there's a bunch of winos. You know, let's call the team name the Winos because they're a bunch of drunk alcoholics. Is that appropriate? Well, that in my sense, yes, it would keep that same stereotype of, oh, all Indians just get their compensation from the government and then they just go and drink and they're useless for the rest of their lives and they're a bunch of drunks. Well, then that team name would, if that's what you used, but Utes, Seminoles, the Indians or whatever, and, you know, they're fighting over Redskins. Well, the Native Americans are using the name. Well, then obviously at least that area doesn't think there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Hopefully some of that made sense. Sorry if I went on a rig.
It did. No, it did. Certainly this, you know, I didn't really think much because I was like, I can't really think of a stereotype, but savages is a really good example there, you know, because it was used as derogatory, and, you know, and to scare people, you know, into, you know, kind of, I don't know. I think it was used, you know, by kind of the men to scare other people or to kind of get that mob mentality going, like, oh, if we don't take care of these savages, they're gonna, you know, take care of us, kind of thing, right? So, you know, trying to use it to whip them up so that they say, well, no, let's do something about them so that they don't take over.
Right.
So how do you think using a Native American as a mascot would contribute to these stereotypes, either positively or negatively?
I mean, I think if you're using that mascot, I mean, if you used a savage mascot, you're still telling everybody what a savage is, and they're going to look at that and, oh, a savage is this type of person. I mean, just like we learned in our book earlier in the semester, you know, what stereotypes, we see it on media and it confirms, you know, our prejudice and our bias that, hey, if look, the team name, they're using it, they must be savages, it must be okay. See, you know, so I think if you use that, you know, at least in a negative way, you're still spreading that name and then the association with it. So I would think But if you're using Indians, like for example with the Cleveland Indians, it just says Indians. To me, it's at least bringing awareness to Indians, and maybe it's giving reference to the culture. And I'll say I'm naive. I haven't really looked at the whole history of the name, but what was the purpose? Was it for the tribe? Was it, hey, the Indians is a cool name? Like, are they doing it to honor, or are they doing it to discriminate and put down and be harmful? So I think that it's like, I think of Indians, it's like, it makes me think of the Indians, the Braves. It still makes me think of the Native Americans still in a positive way. That's what I reference to, maybe because I haven't had any negative interaction, but it's like, hey, it still at least brings our attention to these people. They were a part of the history. Yes, it was terrible and it was horrible, but at least it's a discussion that people can say, hey, yeah, Native Americans, and, I don't know what a Cleveland Cavalier is, but I mean, but it just cracks me up sometimes that I would think that the name association does, but sometimes I don't think there should be that much stock per se put into it's a name. And then everybody takes it out of context, because honestly, you could take anything that anybody says out of context and it'll mean something horrible to somebody else.
Right. Yeah. What is or isn't offensive to one person could be somebody else.
And they could be totally naive and they didn't know what the name was, and oops.
I also feel like no matter what, somebody's going to be offended. No matter what.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's just the world we live in now, which is
like somebody's like looking. If somebody's always looking to be offended, and because they're looking for it, they're going to find it. So, I mean, somebody's going to be offended. There's no right answer here besides get over yourself, basically. So,
I'm with you there. Okay, so do you think that the Washington Redskins should change their names? Why or why not? Any suggestions for a new team name? I don't think
I said no.
I don't think they need to change it. That's just me. And it's probably because they're the rivals, and I always liked, the Cowboys and the Indians playing each other and, on Thanksgiving. So that's just me being a Cowboy fan. But, if they needed to change it and they're in Washington, I'm like, they call themselves the congressmen or senators. Now, what's scarier than that?
right, the Capitals.
I'd rather be known as a Redskin than a senator in these days.
Right?
Seriously. Right? What stereotype and negative connotation do they represent?
Yeah, that's much worse in my opinion. Which would you rather be, a congressman or a Redskin? Yeah, I'll take Redskin. 7 days a week.
I think most everybody would now at this point.
I know, it's just awful.
Yeah.
Awful.
And it's funny, Joan, that you bring that up about, the Cowboys and the Indians playing on Thanksgiving. They even mentioned that in the Wikipedia, that it was like, that was kind of like a negative. Oh, and they even let them play on Thanksgiving. And it's like, so what's wrong with that? It's like they've always played on it. And I mean, I know a lot of that was before my time. My dad grew up a football fan and everything, played football, but it was forever. The Cowboys.
Back in the day, I mean, the Cowboys have always been considered America's team. Now anybody else will dispute that. Anybody that's not a Cowboy fan will dispute that. But and then they were, there's always a, the way the football league is set up. They're set up, the American and the National leagues, and then there's teams in that, and then there's divisions in that, and they were always in the same division, so it was always a rivalry there. It was just always a rivalry. And I guess when they started playing on Thanksgiving, they thought this is a great rivalry because they knew they'd get it. Again, it was all about getting advertising dollars, and more people would watch it than if the Bills and the Jets were playing. Who the heck's going to watch that?
Oh, or the Cleveland Browns. I mean, let's complain about the Browns, right?
Dolphins. Who's going to watch that? So, it's just all about, everybody always tuned in to see the Cowboys play. I mean, it was just who they are,
Exactly. And so I think, and so for me, it's like the reason why I would say no is just for the fact, if in fact it truly was racist, derogatory, or really terrible and that's what it was reflecting, this bad past history, then I would more or less be supporting, like, you know what, I think we should, because that is a little insensitive that we're still talking about this very bad negative connotation. But I just feel my biggest reason for no is if they change, then they're just giving into this small group. And that's just going to be an uprising. It's going to lead to more things down the road. The ACLU is already involved with everything. The whole Black Lives Movement's already involved. And it's just a small majority of people. And I get it. You know, if there's a problem, you do have to speak up. And sometimes it does enact a big change. But the fact that it just draws away from it. I mean, the whole Colin Kaepernick and kneeling, it's like, yeah, I get your point, but you're doing it on a different platform. It's the wrong platform.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get people to change.
But that whole thing, it makes me insane, right? Because Colin Kaepernick, he kneeled for, the mistreatment of African-American men by the police. Like that was kind of his platform, and that's what he did. Okay. Backfired on him a little bit because he's just not that good a player, right? So when he was cut, nobody else picked him up. So then the next one, then last year, I don't even remember who the first group was that kneeled, but they were kneeling until Colin Kaepernick was picked up by another team because they felt like he was being discriminated against because he kneeled the year before. And then it just got blown into this whole, they don't respect the military, which is totally not what the movement was. The people who kneeled last year were kneeling for Colin Kaepernick. They weren't kneeling for the flag, and they weren't kneeling for police brutality. They were kneeling because they wanted Colin Kaepernick to be playing on another team. He's not good enough to be playing on a team. That's why he's not playing. Because you know what? If he was a good quarterback, the team wouldn't have cared what he was kneeling for.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think even in that, the way that they support their case, I mean, shortly thereafter, he was also wearing socks with police officers and pigs. He was wearing a Fidel Castro, and that's the reason that they said
he
couldn't go to Miami because they have a huge Cuban diversity that they don't like him. So it's like the things that you do and the things that people are bringing up, that it's like, hey, listen, he was already a bench player. He had no attention. So the only thing it was, the thing that cracks me up the most, and I think this is what represents is the whole culture of today of negative or not negative. The Baltimore Ravens actually brought him in for an interview. And what's his face? The big old outspoken guy that I can't stand. What's his name? He was their linebacker, the middle linebacker, the big black guy that's all outspoken. It was for the Ravens.
I'm not a big Raven fan.
Yeah,
so I don't know.
Sorry.
He's a big but he committed some crimes and got away, and so it's kind of like, wait, you're a saint to speak? But he's kind of like one of their big main guys, and he went to the owner who's completely white and said, let's make this happen. And he sat down and they're talking about it to really make consideration for it. That same night that they were about to pull the trigger and say, yes, we're gonna hire him, his girlfriend goes on and blasts the organization that they're racist, they're bigots, they're whites, and referenced like some movie and basically said how horrible they were, that they aren't going to hire. And right after that, they basically said, we had to make the choice not to hire him because of this, that it was like, is this the type of player we're bringing in here? And Kaepernick didn't step up and say, hey, my girl's doing on her own thing and she's going off on a tangent. I don't agree with it. But he sat there quiet, and it's like, wait, that's just racist and hate that you're going to bring into your organization, and you're just saying you're fighting for it, where this white owner was taking into consideration and was actually going to make it do it to try to do the right thing. And you just ruined all the chances by attacking them, saying they're these horrible people, yet they were doing the exact opposite as to what you were just saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think...
Listen, I've been in HR too long. People are stupid. Like, you keep your mouth shut until you get the deal. And then, you know, nobody wanted that kind of exposure, and nobody wanted that kind of press for a mediocre player.
Exactly.
You know, if it was, like I said, if it was somebody else, they would take it. They'd say it's worth it. It's, you know, he's good enough that it's worth the negative press. It wasn't good enough.
So I just found the name. It was Jamal Lewis.
Lewis. Okay. Yes.
And you know, and so it's sad that, you know, if that's the reason that they're just trying to make a name change just because they want to whine and a small amount of people have an issue against it. Okay, well then let's have an effective discussion and talk about it. I mean, okay, let's have a new suggestion for a name. I mean, Washington. I mean, like you said, we could do the senators, we could do the politicians. I mean, we could do, but if they still kept the Indians, I mean, what do they want us to talk about? Wounded Knee, that all the whites shot them? Would that be an honor? Like, would there be a different, you know, could we call them the Team Peyote? I mean, would that be okay and acceptable? Like, I mean, you talk to enough people today. I mean, come to California and it's almost like everyone's smoking peyote over here. You know, is that, you know, would that be another tribute, or what would be an acceptable Indian tribute if they're trying to bring awareness that, you know, maybe the namesake could spur a discussion that people realize. I mean, by taking this class, it's like I've seen a lot more in these videos. It's like, wow, you don't really hear that history, how terrible. And you look in that progression where it's like, dude, they came over and basically annihilated them. You know, they gave them smallpox. They had, you know, their warfare and everything. And so, yeah, but certain things could have been done differently that they could have worked in and too, but they basically gave them the worst land possible, basically, so they could not thrive. And then they forced them to try to assimilate and to get involved. And so what would be a great name to honor that group? I mean, would they want the Sioux Indians? I mean, we have, or the Navajo speakers. I mean, would that be a good name? Because in World War II, they played a vital part of that. Would that be an acceptable term, or are there some Navajo that, well, we didn't, you know, it's kind of like the whole mentality of when blacks become educated, the poor blacks disown them. They're like, oh, you think you're good and you're better than us. You don't know what it's like anymore. They hold it against them. It's like, well, I just bettered my life and made a change, but I still respect my heritage and my culture. Mm-hmm. I just didn't want to be stuck as a poor, dumb kid the rest of my life and just, well, I'm stuck in this trap and there's nothing. I did something about it versus here, okay, so they helped out. Yeah, you know, you helped the white man, but at what point do we stop? What point can we stop and say, you know what? I get that's what happened in the past. We can keep changing, but where are we at now that, you know, we're recognizing that was wrong and we need to make a difference. But let's just erase everything that's ever happened. Like it never happened.
That's the part that's a little frustrating for me. Like, let's take down all the Christopher Columbus statues. And yeah, he was a horrible person. But you know what? So let's leave it up there and start a discussion.
Exactly.
As opposed to taking it and putting it in a museum, and then, you know, they're not teaching history in school and, you know, and
yep,
you know, lower schools anymore. So there's never anything going on. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. Any other questions or comments or?
I think I'm good.
You just want to go to bed.
Yep. I have 2 more classes to do before bed, and I'm getting there.
Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations to you, and hope all goes well. And
thanks. I feel bad. The last couple of meetings I've been so flaky, and I'm like, I promise I have a decent excuse.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
So
we should be good from here on out. So
okay. Well, listen, have a good week, and who wants to kind of take the lead next week?
I can.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. See you guys then.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Bye.